Hello everyone, I am Ruby Ravel, and today I want to talk to you about Sun conjunct Pluto, an aspect of death, transformation, and rebirth. When I talk about death, I don't necessarily mean just the death of our physical form after it has surrendered its soul and permitted it to shuffle from this mortal coil. I generally mean death as an abstract process in which there is a letting go of a rigid form that has outgrown its use and purpose, and the gradual transformation and assumption and accretion of a form that is more in keeping with our current needs. From this perspective of representing a transitional state of loss, mutation, and regeneration, death is not actually a rare experience, but one which on some level is accompanying us almost constantly. Almost every moment, an older part of ourselves is dying and a new one is coming into being. And while I can talk about that on a very fractional, atomic level, there are periods in which that process is accelerated, in which we go through the death throes of having to let go of an older version of ourselves so that a new and more relevant part of ourselves can come into being. Now, this happens many times in our lives, often during big shifts in terms of our personal identity and who we are. You know, we might all think about rebirth as this positive thing in which we become our best and most brightest and vibrant self. But in order to become that, we also have to be willing to depart from and let go of all the obstacles and attachment to the past that is taking up the room that that newer version of ourselves wishes to occupy. So there always has to be this grieving process, this push and pull of resistance and acquiescence towards change. It's by no means a clear-cut thing. For instance, when I first decided to become Ruby Ravel, that did not happen overnight. It was a long process of, even though I knew I no longer wanted to live as a man or as my former identity, and that I felt very trapped within that rigid role, I also didn't necessarily have a clear vision of what was coming, of what I would later want to become, because I was too consumed by the obstacle of the present, of the state of who I was at the time. And there was this long process of self-analysis and personal examination in which I had to gradually deconstruct myself. I had to look at all the parts of myself that I had developed, which I had either developed for someone else or to fit in with someone else's expectations or for the expectations of society in general, or because of some expectation that I had imposed upon myself because I was constantly forcing myself into a form that I felt would give me the love that I desired from other people, but which was actually preventing me from being the person who I truly wanted to be. And that was a very long process of just being able to look at myself clearly and say, that's not me, that's got to go, that's worn out its purpose, you know, this is no longer welcome. It's this process of decay, of shedding one's leaves, of skinning off all the dead skin cells when we exfoliate ourselves so that that new shining layer can come through, but which first is very raw and very vulnerable. And there are many states we go like this through in life, particularly when we are transitioning from, say, one state of age to another. You know, when we become an adult, there are many benefits that come with that. More power, more agency, more responsibility, the ability to take greater charge in our life, and a more sense of grounding and self-knowledge and awareness and the wisdom that comes from experience. But there is also the pain and agony of letting go of some of the greater freedom and fluidity and extremity and excitement that we often go through during our teenage years. It's this, I guess you could call that kind of death as being like the indelicate friction between the future and the past, because the past has this kind of centrifugal pull, which is always trying to anchor us back towards what we know, towards what is safe, towards what is familiar, because we associate that with our survival. And then the future is pulling us forward into a different form, into a new cell, into a new avatar, into a new persona, which could be wonderful, glorious, and utterly fulfilling, and far more suitable to what we actually want, and allowing our sun and solar energies to shine forth again. But it requires that leap into the unknown. It requires the ability to have faith in a vision of ourselves which is shining within, but which is not yet manifest. So to break that down into its pertinent astrological symbols, the sun is meant to be a representation of our self at its greatest fulfillment. The person who we are that has its own unique, indomitable light that we are proud to shine forth and let the world to see. It is our identity. It is our noonday achievement that stands before all on the world stage. Whereas Pluto is the totally opposite force that pulls us into the darkness. It says, who you are now has to change. It cannot last forever. It has to go through this period where it is forced back into the womb of the underworld so that it can be safe. Because when we are going through those periods of transformation, like I said, our skin is being peeled off. We are being skeletonized, reduced to our barest attributes. And in that state, we are very vulnerable, because then all of those strange, dark, turbulent forces that we contain within us all come to the fore in this very vivid way. We are reduced to our core elements, all intermingling with one another in this kind of messy fluid turmoil, like a strange chemical reaction. And this kind of deliquescence, this kind of divine decay, is a necessary process. It's basically taking the raw materials of who we are and breaking them down and saying, okay, I've taken down all the Lego bricks of the self. How can we put them back together now in a way that would be more fulfilling according to your current life direction, according to where your sun is hoping to rise and dawn now? What the sun and Pluto really want as a combined, united front is total authenticity and truth of the self. It wants no more lies. It wants whatever part of itself has been trapped too long in the darkness to finally come up above that horizon so that it can be seen. And sometimes that can be something very obvious, that's very clear to us, that we know we are holding back. And sometimes it requires more of that deep psychological investigation to uncover those hidden parts of ourselves, those parts of ourselves that we have repressed, or which we have been so secretive about that we've even succeeded in making them a mystery unto ourselves. So, you know, for instance, like I said, it was this time last year, I think, during this aspect that I first decided I was going to have the courage to transition. For other people, it might be a time when they are ready to admit that maybe their sexuality isn't what they thought it was. But even on a non-sexual front, if any of us feel that we have been living a lie, that some vital part of our essence, of our light, has been trapped and thrust down because we were afraid that it was wrong, that it was a taboo, that it was something we would get punishment and hatred from other people for, then this is the time when we might say, no, I'm tired of living in the darkness. I'm tired of groaning and moaning and suffering and agony in the underworld, and something has to change, and I am willing to be that force of change. And when we look at the animals that represent transformation, you know, we think about a hermit crab when it takes off its shell. But just think for a moment about what happens when a crab keeps growing, but it hasn't changed its shell. If you keep getting bigger, but the structure which is containing you is the same size, then you are just in this state of constant tension. You're trying to get bigger. You want to grow. You want to be more than you are, but the structures which are containing you are just leaving you with this constant sense of tension and agony. There is never any relax because you are always in that vice-like grip of a false structure of self. And the only way you can become yourself is to demolish that structure, is to be willing to destroy it, is to be willing to be that butterfly breaking forth out of its cocoon, spreading its wings and saying, I am willing to be my total self, even if that means putting myself in the pathway of danger, even if that means walking that hazardous razor's edge of life and death, even if that means being willing to depart from and drop the guillotine on things that were once very important to me, but which perhaps have to be severed and departed from for my sun to be able to show its future journey. Now, one of the worst things we can do during a Sun-Pluto transit is if we are not willing to be honest, if we are not willing to engage with those forces of change. Because if we don't seek out that change, if we don't have that willingness within us to depart from what we need to depart from in order to go on that heroic journey, then the monster confronts us. You know, that's when we break out of the shell and we are just left in all of the sharp tatters of what we've broken with nothing to take its place. Or when something comes along and destroys our shell for us, because that's the only way we will leave that comfort zone. And because of that, on a mundane level, just wafting this incense smoke away, which I'm not even sure is coming up on the camera for special effect. Special effect, yes, very high budget here. Lost myself now. Yes, because of that, in mundane astrology, Sun conjunct Pluto can often arise at a time of revelations, of secrets, of hidden things. Like I said, if we are in a state where we haven't made that revelation of our own choice, then some other person might take away that agency and do it for us, like the paparazzi do, for instance. But as the sun is associated with politicians and monarchy and male rulers, that is likely to be particularly a time in which those figures have crimes or corruptions or scandals affiliated with them rising to the surface. I know there's been some controversy around what Prince Harry has been saying and similar things, but more things of that scope are likely to occur. Like I said, I'm not a mundane astrologer, so I don't really talk about that side of things. I'm just kind of making an analogy between the symbolic out there and the symbolic in here. And the interesting thing is that when we're talking about going through a psychological death, when we're talking about going through a death of the self, very often our response to it can follow the same emotional patterns that someone goes through when they are actually dying. And we all know that first state of denial, to say, no, I don't actually need to change, or no, that part of me, which is actually a crucial part of me, it's not real, it's not actually there. You know, like people, for instance, again, who might be ashamed of their true sexuality, might go through years of saying, no, I'm not actually this, I'm not actually that, that's just a fantasy I'm having, it's not there, it's in someone else, it's not in me. And the more we push those things down, the more the external universe has to dramatize our repressions in order to make us face them. And as someone who is a private carer and who does work with people who are dying, I can say that the people who have the most turbulent ends towards the ends of their life are those who are in denial about the fact that they are dying, who don't come to a state of acceptance for it, and therefore fight themselves, believing they're okay, believing that they're going to carry on living forever, and then they end up having more accidents, more chaos, more problems accumulating around them, which just means that they have a more painful and less peaceful end. And it's the same with Sun conjunct Pluto. If we don't embrace those hidden parts of ourselves, if we don't embrace the potential to become that new thing, if we try and abort that fetus in the womb, if we try and abort the birth of the future self, then that's when we end up in these power plays with other people. Because very often people can see those hidden parts of ourselves far more than we can. And if someone know something about ourselves that we haven't yet come to a state of acceptance of, then they can exploit it, they can manipulate it, and they can use that for their own gains, you know. For instance, there's lots of stories of people who are secretly trans, who are living just fully as cis people, and then someone blackmails them to out them about their true identity. It happens with people's sexuality. It can happen with anything, really. But this is the thing, is that secrets, so much of the time, are dangerous because of the power we invest them in, because of the shame and taboo that we've accumulated around that secret. Whereas if we come to a state of acceptance of it, if we are not afraid of a part of ourselves, then we're also not afraid of other people finding out about it too. So there is a real drive to overcome one's fears in order to permit one's personal sun to shine. Anyway, I think that's enough of waving this about and talking about death. If you enjoyed this video, it's cheered me up anyway. I always feel cheered up talking about death. You could see I was a bit somber at the beginning, and then as I got into it and started getting my morbid dance on, then I was just in my zone. I loved it. It was delicious. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, please comment, please like, subscribe, share. You know, all the support I get just helps me hopefully do more of this and with improved quality as I go on. And all of the very best to you and your rebirths.